The process of buying and selling property in this country varies across every state and territory. And this is because each jurisdiction has different laws, particularly around vendor disclosure. In other words, what information a seller must provide to a buyer. The concept of caveat emptor, in other words, buyer beware, applies in every state and territory. And what this means is that buyers have to rely on their own due diligence. Obviously, this is going to be easier for buyers in states with higher levels of vendor disclosure. And one state is at the extreme other end of the spectrum, where next to nothing is disclosed, and it's Queensland. When I first discovered this, I was shocked at just how little needed to be divulged to buyers. But that's all about to change. Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent and buyer's agent mentor, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, author of Auction Ready and co-host of Your First Home Buyer Guide.
And I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker, recently ranked number 5 in Australia out of over 18,000 brokers in the annual MPA Top 100 Mortgage Broker Awards. Before we get started, I need to let you know that nothing we say here can be taken as personal advice. We always recommend you engage the services of an appropriate and experienced professional.
The changes to the Queensland Property Law Act are the most comprehensive changes since 1974 and will require a different way of handling property transactions. On the surface, this would seem to be a good thing, and today we're going to unpack these changes to see how they will affect the way in which property is bought, leased and sold in Queensland. We're joined by Jeremy Streten, who is the founder and CEO of Northern Property and Resumption Lawyers, that's NPR Law. NPR Law focuses on helping property owners buy, sell and lease property, as well as helping property owners when their property is being resumed. We might get a little bit of time to touch on that later. Now, thanks so much for coming along today, Jeremy. Can you start us off with a snapshot of the current situation in Queensland, particularly when it comes to buying, selling property, but also leasing?
Yeah, so thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. Real pleasure to be here. So right now, when we're recording this, there is not a lot of disclosure that goes into a new contract when you're buying a property in Queensland. It's very much buyer beware, and so it's really it's up to you to do your own searches and the like for the property before you go and buy it, whether or not you're buying off the plan or a brand new house. And that's created a lot of problems over the years because people, they thought they were buying something. You mentioned the resumption stuff, and I do a lot of that work. And a lot of people find out when their home's being resumed that things aren't approved properly, or people haven't disclosed things when they bought the property, which ends up reducing the value of the property that they can sell to the government. And the government loves that because then they have to pay less compensation to the property owner. But obviously the homeowner is very, very distraught. And part of the reason for that is the lack of disclosure about knowing what is going on with the property and what are the things that they should be looking out for. So it's been a bit of a problem, and these changes are designed to fix such.
So let's get specific around what a vendor currently doesn't have to disclose and what could go wrong for buyers if they don't know what specific questions to ask.
So there's lots of things that they don't have to disclose, and really it comes down to maybe things that are on the property that might be unaffected by easements and things like easements that aren't registered, I should say. There's certain things like that whilst you're supposed to disclose them, there's not a requirement to disclose them. And if you don't, and the buyer doesn't find out before settlement, then there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas the changes are meant to stop that from happening. They've got to disclose at the moment. You've got to disclose all the stuff about the body corporate, which is a good thing, where you've got a body corporate property. But mainly it's around things that affect the property that aren't registered. That is the biggest problem right now. And so, and as I said, finding that out after you're settled is very difficult to do anything about. But the idea of this is to force onto sellers the requirement to make more disclosure about what is going to affect the property, rather than just letting it be found out in the searches.
Let me give you some examples, right? So I've got Home Buyer Academy, which is a first home buyer course that teaches people, and we've gone through and compared across the country. I also have got a buyer's agent mentoring program, and so buyer's agents across the country need to understand the differences, but often they don't. And I was absolutely astounded when I discovered how little is given away in Queensland. For example, so in New South Wales and in Victoria and some other jurisdictions, you have to get a sewerage diagram. And what that means is that you will be told there's a diagram that shows you, mind you, there are times when it can be inaccurate, but that's sort of another conversation. There's a diagram that shows you exactly where the sewer line runs underneath your property, if it runs underneath your property, or where the connection points are. Now, why is that important? Well, if you want to extend or if you want to put a pool in, it's important. But also, if somebody else has extended and they're built over that sewer line, you want to know whether or not that's been approved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's just so many. That's just one tiny thing. Like I'll give just one other example. I mean, a zoning certificate is not a prescribed document in Queensland. And there's so much information that can be divulged from a zoning certificate that Queensland buyers just don't even get. And if they don't even know what to look for or what to ask for, or if they don't engage a lawyer before they enter into a contract, they wouldn't even have faintest clue about what they need to look into to protect themselves. So they're just two examples on the top of my head. So you deal with this day in, day out. What are the sort of things that, I mean, you must have people coming to you after they've committed to buying a property and they could have had clauses added into their offer that they don't have. And you must have also people come to you before you make an offer. And I would imagine that the outcomes for those people could be really different. Do you want to give us some examples there?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to note, this new changes don't really require all those other things to be disclosed in Queensland.
So it doesn't improve that.
It doesn't improve that side of things.
Still going to be crap.
So there's no, as I understand it, and the approved form hasn't come out as yet. What they're going to require sellers to disclose, but I know from what I've read that things like that aren't on the chopping block to be disclosed going forward. So that's interesting that they haven't even gone as far as what the other states already have.
But that's just fundamental. But so what is going to change?
Well, basically, having a disclosure statement that has certain information in it that people would ordinarily go and do searches for, but not that kind of information. Because up here, people don't do, unless they're developing the property, right? They often don't do those kind of searches. They don't look at a lot of the law firms up here don't do many of the searches that would find out things like sewer plans and things like that. It's just not something that's generally done unless the client has a specific need to develop the property. Like if you're just buying a house and land, then they don't do that. So what we find is it comes down to really discussing with the client first, what do they want to do? And if they do want to develop the property, then often what we'll include is a due diligence clause to allow them to go off and do their inquiries about the property. Because disclosure doesn't have to be given, you've then got to go and do all those searches. And there's a lot of assumptions that are made in the REIQ contract where people maybe don't know that certain parts of the property may not have approvals, or there might be things problematic with the boundary lines and the fences and easements and things like that. So people who are buying land that they want to develop generally have that type of clause in there, but we don't see a lot of specific things about people concerned about sewerage lines and things like that in contracts. We see more. It's a general, I'm going to buy this block of land, maybe move the house off and build something else. So what does that mean? What can I do? So we keep it more broad so that they can really go and do their investigations about the property, as opposed to where you have more specific information that you get at the contract stage.
Jeremy, what about sort of things like surrounding developments? Is it going to be all, the floodplains or things that are going to impact its value? Is there any liability on the sellers to start to disclose these sort of things that are obviously negatives for the property that the market might not know unless they do those searches? Or is it still going to be buyer beware and you have to do all your checks? Potentially it's just a few small changes around the edges.
You're still going to have to do your checks. Flood areas is one of the areas that is being changed, though. So you will have to disclose floods. Obviously, that's been a big deal up here in the last decade and a half or so since the 2011 floods. So that is something that is going to change, that you are going to have to disclose those things. And still, I would be advising any buyer to go and check that for themselves as well. Like the maps, I'm sure they're the same all over Australia, are very comprehensive up here where you can see what is, where the floods are and what's going to change. So that is one area that is going to change. But you do need to disclose that kind of information because that's such a hot topic up here.
That's Brisbane, and, everyone sort of knows that Brisbane floods, don't they? So I guess, weirdly enough, it's probably the one thing that most buyers might check. And I know that Brisbane City Council's information they have online is extremely good. But what about a deposited plan? You mentioned about boundaries, right? And so obviously you're not going to know the boundaries exactly where they are unless you get a survey done. And even in New South Wales and other jurisdictions, it's not a prescribed document to have a survey, but a deposited plan is a prescribed document. Is that something that will be added to the compulsory disclosures?
100%. Yeah, the registered plan is 100% something that has to be disclosed. So a title search, a registered plan, those kind of things, so you can see what you're buying has definitely got to be added in as part of this. As I said, they haven't actually come out with the form at the time of recording this, but I do know that the plan is something that they need to do. And any buyer who uses any lawyer worth their salt will get that plan anyway. And if there's a problem with it, then that does give you rights under the contract, but it is definitely something worth looking at before you enter into the contract.
Jeremy, it's been a bit of a crazy market up in Queensland over the last few years, right? So post-COVID, there's been a massive boom. There's been a lot of interstate buys. Days on market really shortening, a lot of buyers agents playing in the space. How have you seen the whole buy and sell transaction shift? I mean, before it was, on Queensland time, right? There was a 14 days to get your finance done, etc. And, it's complete. That's not what's common in Sydney, right? It's not what's common generally in Melbourne as well. So are you seeing that completely flip on its head and it becoming a much more harder for buyers to transact and easier for sellers to sell?
We definitely saw that over the last few years. So, we're recording this in mid to late 2023. Last couple of years, we've seen that be a thing where it definitely shifted to the seller's side, and it was very hard to get any sort of conditions in a contract. But we are starting to see that shift back as interest rates have gone up. It's not so much a seller's market anymore, and so gone are the days from about 6 months ago, so the early 2023. Where basically you'd sell a property with no conditions. They're basically all cash contracts. Now that there's not as many buyers out there, conditions are creeping into contracts like 14 days finance and things like that. Queensland has always done things differently in the sense of we had the times of the essence contracts where you had a 30-day settlement with a 14-day finance clause, which is done differently to the other states and a lot of other of the Western world, how they do them as well. So, but we are seeing that come back, and I'm seeing that a lot in the work that I'm doing, where people's homes are being resumed when they're buying from the government. When they're selling to the government and they're buying something else, we're seeing more sellers agree to clauses that's subject to the sale to the government of the house, so that they don't have to sell. Whereas for the last couple of years, if you tried to put a clause into a contract that was subject to the sale of your other house, sellers were just balking at that and weren't signing that.
That's a very good point, actually, because obviously when times are tough, as in when it's a seller's market, times are tough for buyers, that is, and they're forced to make quick decisions and they're forced to overlook those comforts of getting that due diligence done, and particularly in a situation where you don't know what you don't know anyway, and you don't know what's missing, or you don't know what information is even out there. Now, I've been talking to buyers agents recently who were telling me that it's actually swinging back in Brisbane and it's getting hot, and, offers are being made at open houses now and basically bought by the Monday following its first open. So that seems to be swinging back the other way, and certainly we're recording this at the end of September, and last month's CoreLogic data showed that Brisbane was the hottest city in the country. So I'm sure that these opportunities to put those clauses back into offers may be short-lived, perhaps, for the moment anyway. The thing is, though, I mean, Brisbane, like the REIQ, for instance, it's an REIQ contract, so you can download it from the Real Estate Institute, not from the Law Institute or the Law Society. You fill it in yourself, you sign it yourself. You don't actually have to have any legal advice. In fact, you can waive your cooling off period without having to talk to a lawyer, whereas in Sydney, in New South Wales, for instance, you have to have a lawyer or a conveyancer sign that. So the protection, so the disclosures are less and the protections are also less in Queensland. And you mentioned also people from, or maybe Chris mentioned it, people from southern states buying up there who perhaps might be used to a more rigid or maybe a slightly more protectionist sort of regime, and then they go up there where it's the Wild West. I mean, the dangers are enormous. Like, as I said, I was shocked when I discovered this when I started doing our research. And I couldn't imagine how anybody who was not familiar with that would not use a buyer's agent. But then I've spoken to some buyer's agents who aren't even aware of that this stuff doesn't exist, and they just run off to make offers, So, if any of you folks are out there trying to look for a buyer's agent, check their due diligence process before you sign up with them if you're buying in Queensland or anywhere really. But so, the contractor sale right, that is a document that is provided by the Real Estate Institute, as I mentioned before. What is anything going to change about that? Are there any other provisions that you think are going to come in that actually protect consumers effectively from themselves, really? Because at the end of the day, if they're totally ignorant, they're not going to know where to even start with this.
Yeah. So the first thing to note is, I think it's it may not be on the contract, but the REIQ contract is actually written in consultation with the Queensland Law Society. So it is actually written, and it's actually there's professors at one of the main universities here who actually recommended these changes to the contract, and they also help rewrite the standard contract. So they have not yet announced what changes they're going to make to the standard contract around these changes, except the what I've read about it is that they're just going to be requiring, going to have clauses in there about providing the disclosure statement and what your rights are if they aren't provided or they are provided in the contract itself. So I don't know whether there's going to be any further protections put in there for buyers, because they have not announced that into the standard contract. I think one of the biggest dangers, Veronica, and you mentioned this, was that you can waive the cooling off period without any advice. And what happens is people get the contract from the real estate agent and they're just told to sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here. And at the end, they sign off on the cooling off, waiving the cooling off period. I had a client who should never have signed a contract. It was an elderly couple. They had no idea what they were signing. They just sign, and they waive the cooling off period. And it's funny. I've been doing this for about 20 years. And when I first started, the law on that side of things was very, very arbitrary on the seller to make sure that there was, I don't know whether you're engaged in Queensland law back there, but there was a disclosure statement that had to be put on the top of the contract, attached as the first sheet, and you could only waive that with a lawyer's advice. And now so that was slowly changed around. And I think it's one of those things I see a lot in the law where bad circumstances make bad law. And I think what happened is there was a lot of cases around that because they had this stupid wording about it had to be attached as the first or top sheet. Then there was all these cases about, was a paper clip attached? Was a bulldog clip attached? Did it have to be stapled? Then electronic stuff came in, right? And so what happens is bad circumstances make bad law. So what the politicians and the people who decide on the laws, they go, well, that's ridiculous. We don't want to have that rule. So they go back the other way, and it swings them backwards and forwards over time. And so I think that if you're buying property up here, you've got to do your due diligence first. Even with this new disclosure, you can't just assume that you've been told everything. And that especially if you want to buy it to develop, long term, you want to make sure that it's all, you've done all your searches, or that you've made it conditional so that you can go and do your searches as part of the contract, because that's not going to change in a meaningful way like the disclosures down south at the moment.
So Jeremy, what just step us through. So someone buying a place in Brisbane now or Queensland, what is the due steps you need to take? What are the searches you think the buyers should do?
So again, it depends on what your goal is, and if you do want to develop and do that with your property, there are things like council searches around what you can do with the property, what approvals are in place for what you've got so far. There are searches around making sure that one of my favorite topics is make sure there's no roads going through your property or train lines. Future plan, because that they come up from people don't even realize where that's going to happen. You do your plan searches to make sure that the properties what you think you're buying is correct. And again, most of it comes down to another one would be contaminated land, to make sure that it's not built on an old petrol station site. And so it's really around those kind of searches that you want to do. And we sit down and go through, okay, what are you trying to achieve with this? property, and then and there's more and more searches you can do. There's like pages of them about the approvals that are on the property, what you can do with the property, what overlays there are, all those kind of things. There's a bunch of free ones you can do too, like Dial Before You Dig and those ones that help you to figure out what you're buying so that you can make sure you want to do with it what you want to do.
I think even if you're just going to buy a family home and not do anything to it, you want to know a bunch of this stuff, like particularly overlays and flooding. And I mean, do you have examples of buyers making fateful errors simply because it's too easy to buy in Queensland?
Yeah, absolutely.
Give us some examples.
For example, what that I'm dealing with right now is these people whose properties are being resumed along the Bruce Highway, which is the highway going from Brisbane up to the Sunshine Coast. And when they bought their properties, a lot of them bought them from the developer, brand new homes about 18 years ago. When the government subdivided the land, they put a covenant and an easement over part of the property. And basically, when they was sold the property, they were told, oh, that just means you can't build on the land. But what it really was doing, that was what the covenant was. The easement allows the government to come and take the property from them. And what happens is that the value of the property comes down by about 200 grand because that land was always going to get taken. And these people bought the property, didn't do the searches, didn't have all these things explained to them properly. And then years down the track, they're looking at their property going, well, we thought it was worth this, because they're looking at Resumption, you're supposed to be paid for the value of your property compared to the market. They're going, but my house is a 4-bedroom house with a pool and all this and this and this and this and this, and we can't get them that. And so that's a big one where people don't realize the effect of things that are registered on title, like easements, and covenants are another big one, especially in developments that have been in the last 20 years up here. There's a lot of covenants that restrict what you can do on your land, and they're both to the government and also to the developer. And because they restrict what you can do with the land, that reduces the value when you're trying to sell in the future.
So what you're saying is that the government was cynical enough to sell off this land on a highway, by the way, with caveats and covenants it's basically put a handbrake on the capital growth, apart from the fact it's on a highway, and then turn around and sting them twice by saying, well, you didn't notice there was a covenant or isn't there that we put there to basically protect our future investment when we want to buy this thing back from you? That's just terrible, isn't it?
It's pretty extraordinary. There's lots of stories around that. In that same one, not to go into too much into that side, they let a development go ahead when they knew they were going to take the road, and all these people built brand new homes, about 20 of them, and basically, in one case, one guy got the notice 7 hours after he moved in to say that his property was going to get resumed after he just built a brand new home that should never have been approved in the first place. But there's
7 hours.
7 hours. He'd moved in, went to his letterbox, pulled out the letter, and 7 hours later, it was the property was being taken.
Oh my God.
The other big one though, in especially in Southeast Queensland, is things that have been built without approvals. So people might have added on a deck or a shed, they might have added a shed, or they might have done something where they've done some improvement to the property that required council approval, and then they haven't gone and got that approval. And some cases it's 20, 30 years down the track, and someone's buying the property and they do their property searches and they realize that you've put this deck out, or you put this shed here, and you never got it approved. And then you've got to go and try and get it approved. Now, in most cases, 99%, it's pretty easy to get the approval. But because people don't do the searches, they have no idea that what they're buying isn't approved, because they just do the cheap search. As Veronica, you said before, a lot of these searches apply for people who are just buying a home. This is 100% applies when you're buying a home. Do your searches and make sure that everything's approved. It's really easy now to jump onto Google, and you can see, a lot of the times that there might be a deck that looks like it's been added on, or something's been done. And so it's really easy for us to go and do a search to find out whether or not that's approved. And so that's probably the other big one that I see people don't do.
Jeremy, can people just keep kicking that down the road, like kick that can, like they didn't know it was approved, they just play ignorant, then they don't do anything, the council doesn't force any changes, then they sell it, they just keep kicking it. Is that often what people do in that scenario?
100%. That happens all the time, Chris. And it's what ends up happening is the person who's 5-6 people down the track of that home, someone finally does a search, and realizes that, this isn't approved, and then they've got to go back. In most cases, you're not going to find the certifier or the builder, so you need to get someone else in to do it. And a certifier is going to be very hesitant to approve someone else's work that they haven't seen all the way through, especially when it was done 30 years ago.
Now, let me be clear here. There's no state or territory in Australia where you have to disclose that works anything about past works, unless you're within a homeowner's warranty period, right? And we request additional documents when we're evaluating a property because we know exactly what you're talking about can happen. And certainly when I was a sales agent, I really noticed the difference in hot markets versus cold markets. In a hot market, buyers will overlook all sorts of stuff. And in a soft market or a cold market, that's when all of a sudden the lawyers start asking hard questions, and then these sorts of missing documentation becomes an absolute sticking point for negotiations. Some properties that fly out the door in a hot market cannot sell in a slow market because buyers suddenly get picky about stuff that they're not picky about when FOMO is driving things. So this is something that's universal. It's not just Queensland that has this problem, but it's also universal that most buyers don't know that they should check it.
100%. And then when they go to sell their property and someone does check it, then they're flummoxed as to why they didn't know about that in the first place.
Well, yeah.
I'm on a personal mission to help more people make better property decisions. And you can find out all about what I'm working on at veronicamorgan.com.au. And there you'll find resources for first home buyers, details about my buyer's agent mentoring program, access to suburb help for investors, or if you're looking to buy your dream home or an investment property in Sydney's inner west, eastern suburbs or lower North Shore, you can connect with my team at Good Deeds Property Buyers.
If you're thinking about buying your first home, upgrading to a new one, or purchasing an investment property anywhere in Australia, we would love to carefully guide you through this journey and importantly get the finance right. Please reach out via our website, wealthful.com.au.
Don't forget that you can download our free full or forecaster report. Which experts can you trust to get it right? theelephantintheroom.com.au.
Jeremy, we're clocking up to 300 episodes soon. And we have never done anything around sort of council or governments acquiring land. And I don't think we've even mentioned the word, to be honest, in 300 episodes. So can you give us a bit of an understanding? Because a lot of people just haven't thought about this and, how it actually works, how the government's got the rights, what it needs to do, and, and how people do need to be, concerned about this when governments are doing massive infrastructure spending. And that's not just affecting the people they acquire, it's also affecting the surrounding properties. And, you might even you didn't think you were living on a main road, but now you are because the main road's come to you. So, maybe give us a bit of an understanding of how it all works.
Yeah, so different states have different regimes, but it's all governed under a broad principle that you don't really own all of your land. The government always has an underlying right to your land. In Queensland, if you've ever looked at a title search, you'll see that the number one thing that's on the encumbrances is a deed of grant. So that's where the government grants the land to you. And that's Australia-wide. So what the government can do at any time is that they can resume the ownership of that property, but they've got to do it on just terms. If anyone's ever watched The Castle, that's what The Castle is about. It's about this exact thing. So they've got to, they've basically got the right, and when I say the government, the federal government can do this. Any of the state governments can do it through their departments, usually the Department of Transport in each state, and the local councils can do it as well. Other departments can do it too. Like we've done resumptions with school, the Department of Education, lots of other things. So basically, if the government sees a need for a property, then they can resume it. So up here, they're expanding the Bruce Highway. That's the one I was talking about before. So they're widening it. So they're taking the properties next to the highway to be able to do that. They're also building 2 new highways, one to the Gold Coast and one to the Sunshine Coast from Brisbane. One's called the Coomera Connector and the other one's called the Moreton Motorway. And so the government can resume the property to put that road through. In Queensland, and that's where I practice in Queensland law, you basically get the value of the home that you lose, or the property that you lose. So it could be commercial property. You get the value to put you in the position to be able to go and buy something just like it. So they've got to pay your stamp duty, your fees, all your legal fees, all your fees to move into a new property. So they've got to pay everything so that you can basically set up in the new house. The problem is that no two properties are really alike. And so what happens is they end up, so you have a valuer appointed, the government gets a valuer, and they go and they used to do a valuation, and surprise, surprise, the government always comes in really low, and your valuer usually comes in very high, and you meet somewhere in the middle. The issue is that, no two properties are the same, so people do struggle to find something exactly the same because it just doesn't exist. Like there's just not two properties that are exactly the same with meeting everyone's needs.
There's also the emotional thing too. I mean, you force, there's like, I've been aware of quite a lot around in Sydney, for instance. We have a lot of infrastructure built, and in Haberfield is a suburb the whole suburb is heritage listed. It was a garden suburb and built in Federation times, and beautiful homes, and people have invested in their renovations with confidence because it's a heritage suburb. And also, not only did they invest with confidence, but it cost them more because it was a heritage suburb. So they had whole sides of streets taken out, and some of these big homes that have been beautifully renovated, pools, the works taken out, shocked everybody. But, so then have to turn around and move somewhere else or move elsewhere in the suburb as well. Very difficult to do it for the same money, even if they're paying the costs, particularly if the market happens to be rising at the time that it happens, you have to move pretty quickly.
What I find is that people definitely feel that at the beginning. Once they find somewhere else and they move in, generally speaking, they're much happier with their situation from where they work. So generally speaking, not every single one of them, but most of the time when they move, yes, it's exceptionally emotional, Veronica, at the time, because the government's taking your house. I bought this house. Well, how can I do this? Especially if you've done lots of work to it. We've got one couple for one of the new highways. The property's been in the family for 90 years.
Oh, yeah.
Handed down from generation to generation, and they were going to hand it down to the next generation. Massive property, talking really big property. And that's now all going to be resumed so the government can put a highway down the middle of it. So there's a lot of emotion in that, and they'll never find somewhere like that. You'll never find that property. But they're also an elderly couple who probably needed to downsize sometime soon anyway. So it's just the family that's missing out long term. But when people get the deal with the government and then go and find somewhere else, generally 99% of the time they feel like they had a win, and they're much happier in the situation that they're in. But it doesn't feel like that at the time.
Jeremy, is there any compensation for the people, that's not getting acquired, that's now next to the road
house.
Or there's been reading articles. I've got a client who's actually not far from what's happening in northern Sydney, with all the Western Harbour Tunnel, and they've been giving noise cancelling headphones to people in the houses because they've been working all through the night, building this road, and their house is absolutely severely affected, right? So, is there any compensation at all financially to people whose values being dropped because of government taking over land that affects their property?
So I can only really speak to Queensland law, and in Queensland, no. The short answer is no. If you don't have part of your property being taken, then there is no compensation to you. I believe that's the same in most other states. There is a difference though between compensation for land taken and then affect by night works, and because there are claims that you can make for disturbance to your general peace and quiet of your home and things like that. So things like headphones and fixing walls that might be broken because of the rattling under when they built the Legacy Way tunnel, we had a lot of these where people's homes were damaged because of the tunneling under their property. That's a different claim. That's a claim in damages because of you can show the cause was because of a tunnel, and that was the reason for the damage to the house. But from a pure resumption basis, as I understand it, this is the same Australia-wide. No, there is no claim if you're just next door. One of the valuers that I work very closely with, he tells the story in Brisbane. There was a service station next to where they were putting a flyover, and originally they were going to put the flyover a couple of meters, so they're going to have to take the whole property. The service station was one of the busiest in Queensland. They realised the amount of money that it was going to cost them, so they moved the road a metre further away, so they didn't have to take anything, killed the business, and the guy got no compensation for it. And as I understand it, that's the same Australia-wide. The one difference between Queensland and other states, in New South Wales and Victoria at least, you have a concept called solatium, which is a one-off pain and suffering payment of about 40-50 grand that you get in addition to all the other amounts. You did not get that in Queensland. So at least of the other in those states, there there's a pain and suffering element, but that's got to be a decision by the government to institute that kind of thing.
Roads are obviously a common one, right? Like that this might happen for, but is there anything else the government's doing? Like, are they going to be doing battery storage? Like, I was just thinking longer term where, it's out of the blue, people wouldn't expect that to happen, but it is happening across the country that you know of.
I haven't heard of battery storage. I know that, say, transmission lines are another big one. So they'll often take an easement through mainly rural properties where they'll put power lines down the side of a property so that they can transmit power to different places. I haven't heard of a battery one. Other ones that they've done, we know in Red Hill at the moment they're going to do a tunnel, a flood mitigation tunnel. So at the moment the water's flowing down like a hill and flooding all the places down the bottom. So what they're going to do is build a pipeline to move the water through. So there's that kind of resumption. They can do. I mentioned before schools. I've done those. When they're going to build a brand new school, they'll resume for a school. And that can just come out of the blue. Like I remember doing one up in Burpengary, which is a suburb in Queensland, and these people bought their acreage blocks, and they just they're nowhere near a highway, nowhere near anything. They thought these were their forever homes, and then the government came along and said, "No, we want to build a school here. We need to take these 10 houses so we can build the school." Hospitals,
another one. I've known a number of people that have had their houses resumed for building hospitals. And what is alarming, though, is what you're basically saying, that governments have a right, supposedly fairly, but, you don't want to be the last one standing. You'd really want to be the one that's taken, wouldn't you?
Yeah, we always say that if you have a choice, you move into the path of a resumption. So there's a new highway, the Moreton Motorway, that's going to be built from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast. And they've only announced 2 stages of it at the moment. But one of those stages, I've got about 40 clients through there. And these are big acreage properties where people have moved out. Not a lot of them, but probably half of them moved out there because they wanted to have a more rural lifestyle, more relaxed lifestyle. And now there's going to be a great big highway going through the middle of their area. And there are people who are going to be overlooking said highway and the construction of said highway for however many years it takes to build a new highway. And there's nothing they can do about it. And it is scary that the government can do that. They have to show that basically the option that they're going with is the only option that is fair and that is the most cost effective and all the rest of that. And there's not another option. If you remember the Castle movie, that's what that was about. It was about whether or not the airport could be expanded to a certain way, and it was cheaper to do it with Kerrigan's house than it was for the other side. That's a very real example. The issue is that the government's much smarter than what they were in that movie, and they do all their due diligence first. So they'll announce maybe 2 or 3 different routes of where this is going to happen, and they would have done all their feasibility studies, and they would have worked out which is going to be the best one. Like they prep it before they get anywhere near telling people what they're going to do.
So when West Connex, which is a big tunnelling system in Sydney, started, and obviously it's in the inner west area that I live and also where our business is situated and where a lot of our clients buy, and it started off as exactly that. The map on the website, it was not interactive. You could not zoom in. If you zoomed in, it pixelated out, had very little detail. It was really, really, really very vague. And over time, it sort of got closer and closer and more focused, and we got to understand more detail. And we certainly identified areas of caution, put it that way. And in some places, like actually where I live, 50 metres, a couple of streets away, basically there's a 50-metre deep tunnel, right? That's all been built. But in some other suburbs, directly underneath houses, is a tunnel 15 metres underneath their house. And we've seen it on contracts where there's been a layer of the stratum, if that's the correct term, that has been purchased by the government, but there's no money changed hands. So it's in there as on the contract, on the title search now. And you think, and it says compulsory, acquisition, but there's no actual acquisition. There's no compensation. There's no compensation. But in contract terms, there's consideration. There's no consideration paid for it. And I've always been astounded. I find it quite weird. You could probably explain it better than. Well, maybe you can explain it so that I can actually get my head around it. How the government can take this layer of dirt effectively, but not pay you for it, but then it goes on your title.
So I don't know the exact situation that you're talking about, because up here, every one of those that we've had, there's been at least some compensation paid, some consideration changing hands. I would presume that there might be some rule that says that, in a basic legal sense, you own your property, and the old way of looking at it was you own everything to the center of the earth and everything up into the sky, right? But that has been changed by legislation and rules over the years. Obviously, you don't own everything up in the sky, because you only own a certain
Well, you're only allowed to build up a certain height. So you might own it, but the council won't allow you to build in it.
Yeah, but you still, it used to be that there was this concept that you owned all the way up, right? But that's been cut off.
So that planes can fly over your head.
Well, that's important, yeah, especially where I live. What I'm going to presume is it's probably been done under the ground too. So they probably only own a certain level, so many meters underground, and so therefore there's no compensation to be paid because you don't own anything under, say, 10 meters or under your property. I'm presuming here.
There actually is that, and because in New South Wales, of course, you do get a title search when you're in a contract to sale. There is that on every single deposited plan, is that there's something underneath the earth, and I don't know how deep it goes. It's basically owned by the government, so it's actually there. So that explains it, right? Got it.
Yeah. So because you don't own it, so they don't have to pay you compensation. Up here, they paid when they built the Legacy Way Tunnel and the Cross River Rail that they're doing now. They just paid like $5,000 compensation to anyone whose property was above it, and they also paid for damage done to the properties as well. So like if you've got the VJ walls and the gaps have increased, then they'll pay to rectify that. That's
So you get a letter in your letterbox saying that your house is about to be compulsorily acquired. What do you do?
The first thing that you do is you go and meet with a lawyer and a valuer. Because at the end of the day,
what type of lawyer though?
Like a lawyer who knows what they're talking about resumption, not just any old lawyer, not your Dennis Diodo, someone who knows what they're talking about in resumptions, because it is a specialist area. You said you've had almost 300 episodes and you've never talked about this before. There's a good reason for that. It doesn't happen that often. When it does happen, it's a very emotional thing for people. So what most people do is they search for a valuer, because what do people care about? They care about how much money they're going to get, and that's very, very normal. And so they go and talk to a valuer and talk about how much how the process works. Again, there are valuers and there are valuers. There are valuers who know what they're doing about resumptions, and then there's ones who they just value houses for banks. So you want to find someone who knows all the tips and tricks and has the experience. And the same with a lawyer. You want a lawyer who knows all the tips and tricks, not someone who is just your local lawyer who doesn't do these on a regular basis, because there are lots of rules, lots of changes that you need to be aware of, and lots of traps for people.
Is there a benefit in banding up with your neighbours and all getting the same legal advice?
100%. We encourage that, not just because it's great for us to act for more people. It actually benefits them more because we can control the process. One of the most dangerous things that can happen in a resumption is that one person goes and settles cheaply with the government, and then the government says, well, this person settled for $500,000. When we try and claim $600,000, they say, well, we only paid $500,000 here, so we don't have to pay anything more. So there's a lot of benefit in everyone either using the same consultants, or at least the consultants talking to each other. And we talk about that a lot. We do a lot of town halls when these things happen.
Oh, yeah.
And so we get people into a room and we talk through the process, and we tell them what's going to happen. And we say, look, you don't have to engage us. If you engage someone else, though, tell us who they are, give them our details so that we can at least coordinate and make sure that everyone's on the same page and we're all going for the same thing. Because if we do that, then everyone benefits rather than settling early.
We've had some clients who had a property compulsorily acquired, and their buyer's agent fees are included in the cost for relocation. Now, they were an elderly couple, and I'm under the impression that not everybody was offered that. So how does somebody, I guess, get an edge over others in terms of added assistance?
So you need to be able to show that you can't go out and find a property by yourself. So otherwise, they'd be paying buyer's agents for everyone.
Yeah, great idea.
So great for the buyer's agent industry. And the government, they look at it and they say no. If you're young enough to go out and find properties and to go and negotiate, then they're not going to pay a buyer's agent. If you've got a medical condition that doesn't let you go out and inspect, or you're elderly or something like that, then they pay it. It's very, very rare that they'll do that though. And we have tried in a lot of situations. We had a lady recently whose foot was amputated and they wouldn't even pay for her.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
They're tough.
And it only happened like a week or two before we asked, and they still wouldn't let it happen. So, it's...
I guess you're not in a position of power though, are you? I mean, in reality, the government decides they're going to do it, and as long as they can sort of tick a box and say it's fair, whether you agree with that definition of fairness or not is another issue. I guess it's sort of like you got to suck it up and make the best of it.
You don't have a lot of leverage, as what I always tell people. So most of the time, this happens by an early acquisition process. So there's a negotiation with the government to take it before they actually require it. If you're in that process, there is no leverage. You've got to come to an agreement with them, or you wait until they actually take the property. When they take the property, the problem is that they can take the property at any time, and they've got 3 years to pay you compensation. And so, if you want to go off to court and fight and do all this other, do all that stuff, to try and get more money, it can often backfire, because then you don't have anywhere to live and you don't have any money. And there are ways around that you can get what we call a draw. You can take money early, but you don't fight it in many situations because it's just not commercially viable. And up here in Queensland, one of the problems is that if you go to court and say that, just to use round figures, say that the government's at 500,000 and you're at 600,000. If you go to court and you win and you get more money, say you get 545,000, you've got to pay their costs because it was closer to their valuation.
Oh, wow.
So that can completely destroy the point in going to court. And so I don't know whether that's the same in other states, but it is just something that we are very live to. And because you don't want to go and have that fight unless you're really sure about the situation that you're going to win.
So how can you prevent this happening when you're in the purchasing phase? How much heads up do you get about, for argument's sake, I think the airport at Badgerys Creek was sort of on the drawing board. It was a greenfields for 30 years or something before they finally decided to actually do it. So in that time, I imagine a lot of people just say, oh, bugger it, they're never going to do that. And then they start buying in an area, or perhaps there's something that was never on the drawing board.
Yeah. So I think, living next to a main road, you've got to expect it. So any sort of main road, any sort of main highway, you've got to expect it. Most of the time, like when they're building Badgerys Creek or a new highway or whatever, it is on the cards for a very, very long time. Yeah, there was a railway, the Redcliffe Railway up here, that was on the cards for about 80 years. And everyone convinced themselves they're never going to do it, and then they finally did it about 6 years ago. So what I'd say is, if it's on the cards, then you've got to be really, really careful if you want to buy there, that you're aware that it could be taken. And most infrastructure isn't really going to ever be, most places aren't really going to have infrastructure go through them. So most suburban areas aren't going to have that. It's probably more likely it's going to go underneath. There's going to be tunnels and things like that. But most of those big projects, especially in the urban areas, are flagged, and they're flagged with a very long lead time. A very, very long lead time. So you should know about it beforehand.
Up where I'm up on the beaches, in northern beaches in Sydney, there was a plan for the beaches tunnel, right? And, that was likely to go ahead at one point. It was, the Liberal Party were winning, they were spending money left, right and centre. That kept progressing through the stages. The environmental survey got done. If Gladys didn't shoot herself in the foot, I think maybe that potentially would have happened, right? But that was playing with valuations massively for people, because they were like, well, that's going to change. So I think there's always a risk that, in that situation, potentially it was good buying in that pocket, because it was, heavily discounted, because there was going to be this road that was going to get built and the war was going to. So how do you but then it might come back up in 5 years' time again. Like, what's your sort of advice around these things? Is it just going in eyes wide open and just making sure that it's factored into its price, or
exactly that. And I think that if you at all think that something might happen because of some plan that's been there, then you're either buying it with that knowledge in place that could happen, or just don't go there. Just go somewhere else. There's plenty of other places where it's not going to happen. They're not going to go putting a main road through a bunch of suburban houses normally without it being pretty well flagged that that's what they're going to want to do a long time in the future. So I would say, it again comes down to what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to, do you want somewhere you're going to live in for the rest of your life? Like a lot of the people that I've got, these are their forever homes. And if that's the case, don't buy there because you just don't know what's going to happen. Go buy somewhere else. If you are willing to buy it, just know that it could be taken at any time. And there's not a lot that you're going to be able to do about it if they do take it.
We had a few clients that actually looked at, and we bought for some property over in Waverton, where we knew that the tunnel was going to go underneath, and also there was going to be a work site, and we had those lengthy conversations around the disruptions around that and what that was going to look like. But we found that, buyers had sort of got a bit weary about it. I think they were like, and not just our clients, I mean, generally speaking, buyers were like, you know what, so what? It's a tunnel. One day it'll be finished and then life will go on, and someone from the other part of Sydney will drive underneath our houses and get to where they want to go quicker. I think that's but that's a bit different to being resumed, and it's certainly a bit different to being on a main road or bigger main road, extra 4 lanes than what was there previously. Jeremy, have you got an example of a property dumbo for us, a lesson, preferably a personal anecdote that we can learn from?
I think I've got loads of them over the years. And a personal one for me was, I get into the game, and I think for me it was selling a property back before the boom up here in about 2019. And we've made a good capital gain out of it, about a 30% gain out of it, but now it probably would have been double the price. So a real dumb move was thinking that the market had peaked, trying to play the market, selling it, and then being left like every now and then I go and look at the price that it sold for subsequently, and I have a scotch just to make myself feel better.
Was that an investment property, Jeremy, or your home?
It was an investment property.
Right. So you got out. Did you buy another property with the gains, or?
No, what we did was we actually used it to pay off our house mostly and start my law firm. So
got it.
It was done. It was invested in something else, but it was not done to invest in a new property, which would have been okay because everything else went up at the same time. And our house has gone up too, but it's obviously we don't want to have too much debt on our house, and so yeah.
It's a good, you did say that you thought that it had peaked, and I think that this is what a lot of people do think. They think that markets only peak once. That's it. It's done. It's like, no, there's not a terminus here. These trains keep rolling. But also Brisbane, if anybody remembers, had gone quite a long period of time up to 2019 without a huge amount of growth and really done nothing much. But certainly since COVID, Brisbane's been one of the biggest performers in Australia. So, yeah, I can understand how looking back now you might kick yourself a bit.
Kind of kick yourself and go, well, that was a mistake. But anyway, live and learn. So
you now have a law firm that you didn't have before.
That's right. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat to us about this. This is, it is a topic that we haven't talked about, and we shall watch with interest to see what happens with the changes to Queensland property legislation as well.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Jeremy.
If you have a question that you'd like us to answer in an upcoming Q&A episode, you can send us a voicemail or written question via the website, theelephantintheroom.com.au, or you can email us directly at questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au. If you like what you're hearing, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars would be great. I know that sounds a bit cringy, but we have it on good authority that every review helps make it easier for other people to find out about us and hear what our